Imagine a wedding night not defined by love, but by a chilling, state-sanctioned terror. Beneath the marble grandeur of the Roman Empire, behind the incense-heavy air of the temples, lay a ritual so grotesque that even the most ruthless emperors eventually tried to scrub it from the records of time. This wasn't just a tradition, it was a blood-bound contract with the shadows. You've been told stories of gladiators and triumphs, but history has a darker underbelly. In the forgotten outskirts of the Eternal City, a bride's scream was considered a holy vibration, and the groom of the grave was a figure every young woman feared more than death itself. For centuries, the elite practiced the Nocte Sanguinis, the night of blood, a ritual believed to keep the gods sated and the empire's foundations firm. But what happens when a ritual intended to bless a union becomes a doorway for something ancient and hungry? Tonight, we peel back the layers of dust and propaganda. We go where the historians were paid to stay silent. Brace yourself as we uncover the horrifying wedding night ritual that Rome tried to erase from history. This is a story of power, perversion, and a darkness that never truly stayed buried. The year was 112 AD, the height of Trajan's reign. Rome was a city of gold and filth, of philosophy and slaughter. For Aurelia, the daughter of a high-ranking senator, life was a series of curated appearances. She was the most beautiful jewel in the Flavian court, but her beauty was a currency her father intended to spend. She had been promised to Marcus, a war-hardened commander 3 times her age. But the marriage wasn't just a political alliance. Marcus was a member of the Sodales Titii, an ancient, secretive priesthood that predated Rome itself, remnants of the Etruscan kings who dealt in the arts of divination and sacrifice. "The ritual is for the safety of the house," her father had whispered, his eyes refusing to meet hers. "The gods require a tithe of innocence to ensure the lineage remains unbreakable." As the wedding day approached, the atmosphere in Rome shifted. The air felt heavy, like the static before a thunderstorm. Aurelia noticed the way the household slaves looked at her, not with envy, but with a pity that chilled her marrow. She began to hear whispers of the lectus funerarius, the funeral bed. In public, the wedding was a spectacle of Roman excess. Thousands of rose petals were strewn across the Via Sacra. Music filled the air. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the celebration took a sharp, discordant turn. The public guests were ushered away, and a group of masked figures, the Flamines, emerged from the shadows of the temple of Mutunus Tutunus. The ritual was known as the consumatio umbrae, the consumption by the shadow. The Romans believed that for a marriage to be powerful, the bride must first be claimed by the chthonic gods of the underworld. Marcus was there, but he wasn't the man she had seen in the sunlight. He was adorned in black iron armor, his face painted with the ash of burnt offerings. "The empire is built on bone," Marcus told her, his voice a gravelly rasp, "and every bone needs a soul to bind it." The room was circular, lit by flickering fat tallow candles that smelled of rancid meat. In the center sat an altar not made of stone, but of stacked human skulls, bleached white and fused together with lead. This was the wedding night the scrolls didn't mention. This was the price of Roman dominance. Aurelia realized then that she wasn't a wife, she was a bridge between the living and the dead. The second part of the ritual began with the draining of the light. The priests began a rhythmic chanting in a language that sounded nothing like Latin. It was guttural, pre-human, vibrating in the very teeth of those present. Aurelia was bound to the skull altar with silk cords soaked in vinegar. The horror of the ritual lay in its psychological cruelty. The priests believed that fear acted as a seasoning for the soul. They began to recount the history of the unspoken, a litany of every atrocity Rome had committed to rise to power. Every village burned, every child enslaved, every betrayal. They told her that her womb would now become the vessel for these restless spirits, ensuring that the Roman genius would never die. Suddenly, the candles were extinguished. In the absolute pitch black, Aurelia felt something cold, colder than ice, brush against her skin. It wasn't the hand of Marcus. It was something fluid, something that moved like smoke. This was the groom of the grave. The Romans believed that a physical manifestation of the god Orcus would visit the bride. In reality, it was a drug-induced hallucination fueled by the toxic vapors of the underground chambers, combined with the presence of the masked priests who used tactile terror to break the girl's mind. "Accept the darkness," the voices hissed from every corner. Aurelia fought. She was a daughter of Rome, but she possessed a spark of the old Sabine blood, a fierce, untamed will. As the shadow pressed down on her, she didn't scream in terror, she screamed in rage. She bit the hand of a priest who tried to force a chalice of drugged wine into her mouth. The ritual faltered. The chanting broke. "She resists!" one of the priests cried out, his voice trembling. "The offering is tainted!" Marcus stepped forward, his iron boots echoing on the stone. He looked down at his bride, his face a mask of conflict. He had seen the horrors of the Germanic wars. He had seen cities leveled. But there was something in Aurelia's eyes, a defiance that challenged the very foundations of his faith. "The ritual must be completed," Marcus whispered, though he seemed to be trying to convince himself. "Otherwise, the shadows will take us all." But the shadows were already there. Whether it was the drugs or something truly supernatural, the room began to warp. The walls seemed to bleed a black, viscous oil. The skulls on the altar began to chatter. The priests who had spent their lives playing with these dark forces suddenly realized they were no longer in control. The ritual Rome had used to maintain its power was turning inward, hungry for those who had summoned it. The final hours of the night were a blur of chaos and carnage. The underground chamber became a tomb for the priests. In their panic, they turned on one another, convinced that the tainted bride had invited a demon into their midst. Aurelia managed to slip her bonds as the priests fought Marcus. She didn't run for the exit. She knew she would be caught. Instead, she crawled into the narrow ventilation shafts that led toward the great cloaca, the massive sewer system of Rome. As she navigated the darkness, she heard the sounds of the massacre behind her. It wasn't the sound of men dying, it was the sound of something being torn apart. The Nocte Sanguinis had failed, and in its failure, it had consumed its practitioners. When the sun rose over the 7 hills the next morning, Marcus's villa was silent. The senator, Aurelia's father, arrived to find the house empty. The wedding guests were gone, and the basement entrance had been caved in, buried under tons of rubble, as if someone had tried to seal a wound. Aurelia was never found. Some say she escaped to the north, living among the tribes the Romans called barbarians. Others say she became the ghost of the Palatine, a vengeful spirit that hunted the men who sought to revive the old dark rituals. Years later, when the Emperor Constantine rose to power and converted to Christianity, he came across the fragmented records of the Nocte Sanguinis. Horrified by the depravity and the occult nature of the ritual, he ordered every scroll mentioning it to be burned. The priests were executed, and the temples associated with the groom of the grave were leveled and paved over with churches. Rome tried to erase the ritual from history because it represented a truth they couldn't face, that their civilization wasn't just built on law and order, but on a foundation of systematic terror and human sacrifice. They wanted the world to remember the aqueducts and the Senate, not the screaming brides in the dark. But history has a way of leaking through the cracks. Even today, archaeologists excavating the deep layers of Rome occasionally find curse tablets buried near marriage altars, small lead plates pleading with the gods to protect a bride from the night of blood. The ritual was erased, but the fear remained. The story of Aurelia serves as a reminder that the most civilized societies often harbor the most primal horrors. The wedding night Rome tried to hide wasn't just a ceremony. It was a mirror reflecting the darkness of an empire that thought it could own the souls of its people. And sometimes, when the moon is thin over the ruins of the Forum, people say you can still hear the faint, rhythmic chanting of a language that should have died 2,000 years ago.